The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Charles stepped out onto the stone terrace. His weathered hands gripped the ornate railing, and, for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that had brought him to this point. At 74, he had finally ascended to the throne he had waited his entire life to occupy, yet the crown felt heavier than he had ever imagined it would. Inside the castle, preparations were underway for what the palace staff had quietly termed a delicate family gathering. It was the first major royal event since his coronation, and tensions that had simmered beneath the surface for decades were threatening to boil over. Charles knew that today would test not just his authority as king, but his wisdom as a father and his judgment as a man who had spent most of his adult life navigating the treacherous waters of royal protocol and personal desire. The sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel path below caught his attention. He watched as Kate emerged from the morning mist, her auburn hair catching the early light as she walked with the measured grace that had become her trademark. Even from this distance, Charles could see the subtle signs of strain around her eyes, the careful way she held her shoulders. The past months had been particularly challenging for his daughter-in-law, and he found himself admiring her resilience more with each passing day. Kate had always been different from the other women who had entered their family circle. Where others had seemed to wilt under the intense scrutiny of royal life, she had somehow managed to maintain her authenticity while adapting to the demands of her position. Charles remembered the first time William had brought her home to meet the family, how nervous she had been, how carefully she had chosen her words. Now, years later, she moved through royal circles with a confidence that seemed effortless, though Charles suspected it had been hard-won. As he watched her disappear into the castle through a side entrance, Charles reflected on the conversation he had shared with William just days earlier. His eldest son had seemed unusually agitated, pacing the length of his father's study while outlining his concerns about the family dynamics that would be on full display today. William had always been protective of Kate, but, lately, that protectiveness had taken on an edge that worried Charles. "She's carrying too much," William had said, his voice tight with frustration. "The public expects her to be perfect, the media scrutinizes every move she makes, and, now with all the family tensions, she's caught in the middle of things that have nothing to do with her." Charles had listened carefully, recognizing in his son's words the same protective instinct he had once felt for Diana, though under very different circumstances. The comparison was not lost on him, and it stirred up emotions he had thought he had long since resolved. The royal family had learned painful lessons about the cost of public scrutiny on the women who married into their ranks, and Charles was determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The breakfast room buzzed with quiet activity as staff members made final preparations for the family gathering. Crystal glasses caught the morning light streaming through tall windows, while fresh flowers from the castle gardens added splashes of color to the formal table setting. Charles entered the room to find Camilla already seated, reviewing what appeared to be a carefully planned seating arrangement. "Good morning, darling," she said without looking up from her papers. "I've been thinking about today's arrangements, and I believe we should place Kate further down the table. Given the current circumstances, it might be best to minimize any potential complications." Charles paused, considering his wife's words. Camilla had always been practical about such matters, approaching royal protocol with the systematic precision of someone who had spent years learning to navigate its complexities. Her suggestions were usually sound, based on a careful analysis of potential political and social ramifications. Yet something about this particular suggestion struck him as wrong, though he couldn't immediately articulate why. "I'm not sure that's the right approach," he said finally, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Kate has earned her place in this family, and she shouldn't be made to feel as though she's somehow secondary to our concerns about appearances." Camilla's pen stopped moving across the paper, and she looked up with raised eyebrows. "I'm not suggesting she's secondary, Charles. I'm simply trying to prevent an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. You know how these family gatherings can become complicated when emotions run high." Before Charles could respond, the sound of voices in the hallway announced the arrival of other family members. William entered first, his tall frame filling the doorway as he surveyed the room with the careful attention of someone who had learned to anticipate potential problems. Behind him came Kate, and Charles was struck again by her composed demeanor despite what he knew must be considerable internal pressure. "Your Majesty," Kate said with a slight curtsy, the formality of the gesture somehow managing to convey both respect and a subtle distance that hadn't been there in their previous interactions. "Please, Kate," Charles said, rising from his chair. We're family here. There's no need for such formality. The exchange was brief, but Charles noticed how Kate's eyes flickered toward Camilla before returning to meet his gaze. There was something in that look, not defiance exactly, but a quiet determination that suggested she was prepared for whatever challenges the day might bring. William moved to stand slightly behind his wife, his protective instincts clearly on high alert. As other family members began to arrive, Charles found himself paying closer attention to the subtle dynamics that played out in the room. Harry and Meghan's absence was felt keenly, their empty chairs serving as a reminder of the fractures that had developed within the family. The conversations that filled the room were carefully polite, but Charles could sense the undercurrents of tension that threatened to surface at any moment. Anne arrived with her characteristic no-nonsense attitude, greeting everyone with brisk efficiency before taking her seat. Edward and Sophie followed shortly after, their own expressions suggesting they were well aware of the potential for discord. Each family member seemed to be playing a carefully rehearsed role, maintaining the facade of unity that the public expected while privately navigating their individual concerns and loyalties. The meal itself proceeded with the mechanical precision of a well-orchestrated performance. Conversation topics were chosen with diplomatic care, avoiding the subjects that everyone knew could lead to conflict. Charles found himself studying the faces around the table, noting the careful way each person measured their words, the subtle glances that passed between family members, the unspoken communications that had become second nature to all of them. It was during the second course that the first crack in the facade began to show. The conversation had turned to upcoming royal engagements, and Camilla was outlining her vision for several high-profile events. Her tone was confident and authoritative, reflecting her growing comfort in her role as queen consort. As she spoke, Charles noticed Kate's expression becoming increasingly guarded. "I think it's important that we present a unified front," Camilla was saying. "The public needs to see that we're all working together toward common goals. That means everyone needs to be willing to support the decisions that are made, even when they might prefer different approaches." The words were diplomatic enough, but Charles caught the subtle implication that Kate needed to be more deferential to Camilla's authority. He saw William's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and he realized that his son was interpreting Camilla's comments the same way. "Of course," Kate replied smoothly. "I've always believed that supporting the institution means being honest about what approaches will be most effective. Sometimes that requires offering different perspectives, even when it might be easier to simply agree." The exchange was polite on the surface, but Charles recognized it as the opening move in a chess match that had been building for months. Both women were testing boundaries, establishing their positions for conflicts that would inevitably arise as the family adjusted to its new hierarchy under Charles's reign. As the meal continued, Charles found his attention repeatedly drawn to Kate. She participated in conversations with her usual grace and intelligence, but he could sense the effort it was costing her to maintain her composure. There was something almost heroic about her determination to fulfill her duties despite the obvious strain she was under, and he felt a growing admiration for the woman his son had chosen to marry. The formal portion of the gathering concluded with plans being made for upcoming engagements and a review of the family's public appearances for the next several weeks. As family members began to disperse, Charles noticed that Kate seemed to hesitate, as though uncertain about whether she should approach him or simply leave with William. "Kate," he called out, making the decision for both of them. "Could I have a word with you in private?" William looked up sharply at his father's request, but Kate placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's fine," she said quietly. "I'll meet you in the car." As the room emptied, Charles found himself alone with his daughter-in-law for the first time in several weeks. The silence stretched between them for a moment before Kate spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "I hope you know that I would never do anything to embarrass the family or undermine your authority," she said. "I understand that my position comes with certain responsibilities, and I take those very seriously." Charles studied her face, noting the sincerity in her eyes and the slight tremor in her voice that suggested she was not as composed as she appeared. "Kate," he said gently, "I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for the way you've handled yourself since joining our family. You've shown grace under pressure that would have broken many others." Something shifted in Kate's expression, a slight relaxation of the careful mask she had been wearing. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means more to me than you might realize. I also want you to know," Charles continued, "that you have my full support. Whatever challenges lie ahead, whatever tensions might arise within the family, I want you to feel confident that you can count on me to have your best interests at heart." Kate's eyes brightened with what might have been unshed tears. "Sometimes it feels like I'm walking through a minefield, trying to balance everyone's expectations while staying true to myself." "The women who marry into this family face unique challenges," Charles said, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "I've seen how difficult it can be, how the pressures can become overwhelming. I don't want you to feel that you're facing those challenges alone." As Kate left to join William, Charles remained in the empty dining room, contemplating the conversation that had just taken place. He realized that something significant had shifted in his relationship with his daughter-in-law, a new understanding that would influence how he approached the complex family dynamics that lay ahead. The afternoon brought a series of individual conversations as family members processed their own reactions to the morning's gathering. Charles spent time with William, listening as his son expressed his concerns about the pressures Kate was facing and his frustration with what he perceived as attempts to marginalize her within the family structure. "She's not asking for special treatment," William said, his voice intense with emotion. "She just wants to be allowed to contribute in her own way, to use her strengths for the benefit of the institution. But every time she tries to step forward, it feels like someone is trying to push her back into a predetermined role that doesn't really fit who she is." Charles listened carefully, recognizing that his son's concerns went deeper than simple marital protectiveness. William was articulating a broader tension within the royal family about how to balance tradition with the need for evolution, how to honor established protocols while remaining relevant to contemporary society. As evening approached, Charles found himself walking alone through the castle gardens, reflecting on the day's events and their implications for the future. The conversations had revealed fault lines within the family that would need to be addressed carefully if they were to avoid more serious conflicts down the road. He thought about Kate's quiet dignity, her obvious intelligence, and her genuine commitment to serving the institution despite the personal costs involved. He thought about William's fierce loyalty to his wife, and his frustration with what he saw as unfair treatment. He thought about Camilla's practical concerns about protocol and hierarchy, her own adjustment to the complexities of her new role. Most of all, he thought about his responsibility as both king and father to find a way forward that honored everyone's contributions while maintaining the stability that the monarchy required. The decisions he made in the coming weeks would shape not just his own reign, but the future of the institution he had inherited. As the sun set behind the castle walls, Charles made a decision that would soon surprise everyone who thought they understood the dynamics within the royal family. The next major public event would provide an opportunity to demonstrate his vision for how the family would function under his leadership, and Kate would play a central role in that demonstration. The stage was set for a moment that would redefine relationships within the royal family and send a clear message about Charles's priorities as king. What no one anticipated was just how dramatic that moment would prove to be, or how it would silence an entire room with its unexpected implications. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a showcase of British elegance and tradition. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with white roses and gold accents, while the subtle sounds of a string quartet provided an atmosphere of refined sophistication. Tonight's charity gala represented more than just another royal engagement. It was Charles's first major public event as king where the entire family would be present, and every detail had been scrutinized for its symbolic significance. Kate stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the sapphire necklace that had once belonged to Diana. The irony was not lost on her that she was wearing jewelry that had belonged to William's mother on a night when she felt more isolated within the royal family than ever before. The past week had been particularly challenging, with subtle but unmistakable signs that certain family members were working to diminish her influence and limit her role in upcoming engagements. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see her lady-in-waiting with some last-minute detail about the evening's schedule. Instead, William entered, resplendent in his formal evening wear but wearing an expression of barely controlled frustration. "I've just spoken with Father about tonight's arrangements," he said without preamble. "They've moved you to the second tier of the receiving line." Kate's hands stilled on her necklace. The receiving line was more than just protocol. It was a clear indication of hierarchy within the family, a public statement about who held what level of importance. Being moved to the second tier was a deliberate slight, and everyone in attendance would understand its significance. "Did he say why?" Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Camilla's suggestion, apparently. Something about maintaining proper protocol during the transition period. William's voice carried an edge of anger that he rarely allowed to show. As if you haven't earned your place through years of dedication and service. Kate turned from the mirror to face her husband, noting the tightness around his eyes that indicated he was struggling to maintain his composure. "It's not worth making a scene over," she said quietly. "We have more important things to focus on tonight." "It's exactly the kind of thing that is worth making a scene over," William replied firmly. "These small slights add up, Kate. If we don't push back now, it will only get worse." Before Kate could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time it was Princess Anne, who entered without waiting for permission in her characteristic direct manner. Her expression was serious as she looked between William and Kate. "I assume you've heard about tonight's arrangements," and said without preamble. "I want you to know that some of us disagree with the decision." But Camilla was quite insistent about maintaining what she called appropriate hierarchy. Kate felt a flash of appreciation for Anne's straightforward approach. The Princess Royal had always been direct in her communications, and her willingness to acknowledge the unfairness of the situation was more supportive than any flowery reassurances would have been. "I appreciate you telling us," Kate replied. "It helps to know where everyone stands," and studied Kate's face for a moment before speaking again. "You've handled these challenges with remarkable grace. Not everyone in your position would have managed as well." She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "Charles may surprise you tonight. He's been doing a lot of thinking since our family gathering last week." After and left, Kate and William finished their preparations in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the evening ahead. The tension that had been building within the family over the past months felt like a storm about to break, and neither of them was entirely sure how the night would unfold. The arrival at Buckingham Palace was orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. Each car arrived at precisely scheduled intervals, allowing photographers to capture the family members as they made their way into the building. Kate and William's arrival was met with the usual fanfare from the gathered crowds, but Kate couldn't shake the feeling that tonight felt different somehow. Inside the palace, the family gathered in the blue drawing room for final preparations before the guests arrived. The atmosphere was formally cordial, with everyone playing their prescribed roles while carefully monitoring the underlying tensions that threatened to surface. Charles appeared relaxed and confident, discussing last-minute details with his private secretary while acknowledging each family member with appropriate warmth. Camilla moved through the room with the authority of someone who had fully embraced her new position. Her interactions with Kate were polite but distant, maintaining a careful barrier that made it clear she considered herself the senior woman in the family hierarchy. The subtle power dynamics were obvious to everyone present, though no one addressed them directly. As the first guests began to arrive, the family took their positions in the receiving line. Kate found herself exactly where William had warned her she would be, in the second tier, behind Camilla, and slightly to the left of where protocol would normally have placed her. The positioning was subtle enough that casual observers might not notice, but for those familiar with royal protocol, the message was unmistakable. The receiving line proceeded smoothly for the first hour, with Kate greeting guests with her usual warmth and genuine interest in their charitable work. She had always excelled at these interactions, possessing a natural ability to make people feel seen and valued during their brief moments with the royal family. Tonight, however, she could sense the undercurrents of tension that seemed to affect every interaction. It was during a brief pause between groups of guests that Kate noticed Charles watching her. His expression was thoughtful, almost analytical, as though he was processing something important. When their eyes met, he offered a slight nod that seemed to carry more weight than a simple acknowledgement. The evening's formal program began with speeches from various charity representatives, followed by Charles's address to the assembled guests. His remarks were eloquent and passionate, highlighting the importance of charitable work in building stronger communities. But Kate noticed that his eyes frequently found her during his speech, and there seemed to be layers of meaning in his words that went beyond their surface message. The strength of any institution lies not in its traditions alone, but in its ability to recognize and honor the contributions of those who bring fresh perspectives and genuine commitment to its mission, Charles said at one point, his gaze meeting Kate's directly. True leadership requires the wisdom to value substance over protocol when the two come into conflict. The words sent a ripple of awareness through the assembled family members, each interpreting the statement through their own understanding of the current tensions. Kate felt her heart rate increase slightly, as she realized that Charles might be preparing to make some kind of public statement about the family dynamics. As the formal speeches concluded and guests began to mingle more freely throughout the ballroom, Kate found herself approached by several prominent charity leaders who wanted to discuss potential collaborations. She was deeply engaged in a conversation about mental health initiatives when she became aware of a commotion near the center of the room. Charles was standing near the main podium, and it appeared he was preparing to make an additional address. This was not part of the planned program, and Kate could see members of his staff looking confused about the unexpected development. The string quartet gradually faded to silence as Charles raised his hand to request attention from the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Before we continue with this evening's festivities, I'd like to take a moment to address something that I believe is important for all of us to understand." The silence in the room was complete now, with even the soft sounds of movement and whispered conversations falling away. Kate felt William tense beside her, and she could see Camilla across the room wearing an expression of carefully controlled concern. "Throughout my life, I have been blessed to work alongside individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary commitment to service and to the causes we hold dear," Charles continued. "Sometimes, however, we allow protocol and tradition to overshadow our recognition of true merit and genuine contribution." Kate's breath caught in her throat as she realized that Charles was building towards something significant. The formal language and careful pacing suggested that this was not a spontaneous gesture, but rather a carefully considered statement that would have lasting implications. "This evening, I want to take the opportunity to publicly acknowledge someone whose grace, intelligence, and dedication have been a source of strength not just for our family, but for the institution itself," Charles said, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Kate. "Someone who has faced extraordinary challenges with remarkable dignity and who has earned a level of respect that should be reflected in how we recognize her contributions." The silence in the room was so complete that Kate could hear her own heartbeat. She was aware of hundreds of eyes turning toward her, of cameras that would capture whatever happened next, of the moment stretching out with the weight of historical significance. Charles began to move across the room, his path clearly aimed in her direction. With each step, the tension in the room seemed to increase exponentially. Kate could see Camilla's expression shifting from concern to something approaching alarm as she realized what was about to happen. "Kate," Charles said as he approached, his voice warm but carrying an authority that silenced any potential objections. "Would you join me, please?" The request was phrased politely, but everyone in the room understood it was not really a request. Kate felt William's hand briefly touch her arm in a gesture of support as she stepped forward to meet her father-in-law in the center of the ballroom. As she walked toward Charles, Kate was acutely aware of the historical weight of the moment. She could feel the eyes of everyone present following her movement, could sense the rapid calculations being made by family members, staff, and guests about what this unexpected development might mean. When she reached Charles, he extended his hand toward her in a gesture that was both formal and deeply personal. The symbolism was unmistakable. He was publicly choosing to acknowledge her status and importance within the family structure, regardless of whatever private tensions might exist. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles said, his hand still extended toward Kate, "I want to introduce you to someone who represents the very best of what service and dedication can achieve. Someone who has my complete confidence and support as we move forward together." Kate took his offered hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip as he guided her to stand beside him. The gesture was simple, but its implications reverberated through the room like a stone thrown into still water. She could see shock and approval warring on different faces throughout the audience, could sense the rapid adjustment of expectations and assumptions that such a public display of support would require. From across the room, she caught sight of Camilla's face, which had gone pale with what appeared to be a mixture of surprise and barely controlled anger. The queen consort had clearly not expected this development, and her carefully maintained composure was showing signs of strain. William's expression, by contrast, showed a mixture of pride and relief that his father had chosen to make such a strong public statement. The gesture represented more than just support for Kate. It was a clear indication of how Charles intended to structure his reign and where his priorities lay. As Charles continued to speak about Kate's contributions to various charitable causes and her role within the family, Kate found herself thinking about how dramatically this moment would change the dynamics within their family circle. The public nature of Charles's support would make it difficult for anyone to continue the subtle campaign of marginalization that had been building over the past months. The audience's reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with warm applause and expressions of approval rippling through the assembled guests. Many of them had worked with Kate on various charitable initiatives and had witnessed firsthand her genuine commitment and effectiveness. Charles's public recognition aligned with their own experiences and observations. As the impromptu address concluded and the evening's activities resumed, Kate found herself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters who wanted to express their appreciation for her work. The gesture had shifted the entire tone of the evening, replacing the underlying tension with a sense of resolution and clarity about the family's hierarchy and priorities. But even as she graciously accepted congratulations and engaged in conversations about future collaborations, Kate was acutely aware that the real consequences of this moment would play out in private. The public gesture had been powerful and meaningful, but it had also drawn clear lines within the family that would need to be navigated carefully in the days and weeks to come. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, photographs, and ceremonial presentations. Throughout it all, Kate maintained her composure and grace, but she could feel the undercurrents of change flowing around her. Charles's unexpected gesture had altered the landscape of family relationships in ways that would take time to fully understand and process. As the last guests departed and the family gathered for a brief, private moment before leaving the palace, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tensions and acknowledgments. Charles's decision to make such a public statement had been bold and unexpected, and everyone present understood that it would have lasting consequences for how the family functioned going forward. The evening had demonstrated Charles's willingness to use his authority as king to protect and support those he valued, regardless of potential objections from other family members. It had also shown Kate that she had an ally in her father-in-law who was prepared to take significant risks to ensure her proper recognition within the family structure. As Kate and William prepared to leave for their own residence, Charles approached them one final time. "I hope you understand why I felt tonight's gesture was necessary," he said quietly. "Some things are too important to be left to private conversations and subtle negotiations." Kate met his gaze directly, seeing in his eyes the same determination that had driven his unexpected public address. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." The drive home was quiet, with both Kate and William processing the significance of what had just occurred. The evening had marked a turning point in the family dynamics, establishing new ground rules for how relationships would function under Charles's reign. The gesture had been powerful and supportive, but it had also created new challenges that would need to be addressed in the complex web of royal family politics. As their car wound through the London streets, Kate reflected on how dramatically her position within the family had shifted in the course of a single evening. Charles's public support had provided her with a level of protection and authority that would be difficult for anyone to challenge, but it had also made her a more prominent figure in the ongoing tensions within the family structure. The true test of tonight's gesture would come in the weeks ahead, as the family adjusted to the new reality that Charles had created with his unexpected public statement. But for now, Kate felt a sense of relief and gratitude that she had found such a strong ally in her father-in-law, someone who was willing to use his considerable authority to ensure that merit and genuine contribution were properly recognized and valued. The aftermath of the charity gala rippled through royal circles like waves from a stone dropped in still water. In the 3 weeks that followed Charles's unexpected public gesture of support for Kate, the carefully constructed dynamics within the family underwent a dramatic transformation that no one had anticipated. Palace staff whispered in corners, newspaper columnists analyzed every photograph for hidden meanings, and family members found themselves navigating an entirely new landscape of relationships and expectations. Kate sat in her private office at Kensington Palace, reviewing correspondence from various charitable organizations that had flooded in since the gala. The public response to Charles's statement had been overwhelmingly positive, with numerous groups reaching out to propose collaborations and partnerships. Her desk was covered with invitations, proposals, and letters of support from organizations across the Commonwealth, each representing opportunities that would have been unimaginable just a month earlier. Yet despite the professional opportunities that Charles's endorsement had created, Kate found herself grappling with the personal complexities that had emerged in its wake. The gesture had certainly strengthened her position within the institution, but it had also intensified the scrutiny from family members who viewed her elevated status with varying degrees of acceptance and resentment. A gentle knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, looking up to see her private secretary, Maria, entering with her usual efficient demeanor. "Ma'am, you have a call from Clarence's house," Maria announced. "His Majesty would like to speak with you directly." Kate felt a flutter of nervousness as she reached for the phone. While Charles had certainly demonstrated his support publicly, their private communications since the gala had been limited to brief exchanges at family gatherings. A direct phone call suggested that something significant was developing. "Kate," Charles's warm voice came through the receiver. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Kate replied. "I was just reviewing some of the charitable proposals that have come in since the gala. The response has been quite overwhelming." "That's actually part of what I wanted to discuss with you," Charles said. "I've been thinking about how we can best utilize this momentum to advance some causes that are particularly important to both of us. Would you be available to join me for lunch tomorrow? There are some ideas I'd like to explore with you." The invitation represented more than just a meal. It was a clear signal that Charles intended to continue supporting Kate's elevated role within the family structure. "I'd be honored," Kate replied. "Should William plan to join us?" "Actually, I was hoping we could meet one-on-one," Charles said. "There are some sensitive matters I'd like to discuss that might be better addressed in a private setting." After concluding the call, Kate found herself wondering what Charles wanted to discuss that required such privacy. The past weeks had been filled with subtle tensions and careful negotiations as family members adjusted to the new reality that his public gesture had created. While the support had been invaluable, it had also placed Kate in a more prominent position that required careful navigation. The next day, Kate arrived at Clarence's house to find Charles waiting in his private study, surrounded by books and papers that suggested he had been working on matters of considerable complexity. His greeting was warm, but carried an undertone of serious purpose that indicated this was not simply a social call. "Thank you for coming," Charles said, gesturing for Kate to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. "I wanted to speak with you away from the usual family dynamics, because what I have to propose may be somewhat controversial." Kate settled into her chair, noting the careful way Charles had chosen his words. "I'm listening," she said simply. Charles moved to stand near the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that Kate had come to recognize as his thinking position. "The response to our public appearance together has been remarkable," he began. "It's demonstrated something that I've long suspected but haven't had the opportunity to test properly." "What's that?" Kate asked. "That you have a unique ability to connect with people in a way that transcends traditional royal protocol," Charles replied, turning to face her. "Your approach to charitable work, your interactions with the public, even the way you handle media scrutiny, it all suggests that you could be extraordinarily effective in a more prominent role." Kate felt her heart rate increase as she began to understand where the conversation might be heading. "What kind of role are you thinking about?" Charles returned to his seat, leaning forward slightly as he continued. "I want to propose that you take on the leadership of a new initiative that would coordinate charitable efforts across the Commonwealth. It would require extensive travel, high-profile public appearances, and a level of independence that hasn't traditionally been granted to members of our family." The magnitude of what Charles was suggesting took Kate's breath away. Such a role would represent not just increased responsibility, but a fundamental shift in how the royal family operated. It would place her in a position of authority that would be difficult for anyone to challenge or diminish. "That's an extraordinary opportunity," Kate said carefully. "But I imagine it would also be quite controversial within the family." "Undoubtedly," Charles agreed, "which is why I wanted to discuss it with you privately first. If you're interested in pursuing this path, we'll need to handle the introduction of the idea very carefully." Kate considered the proposal, weighing the professional opportunities against the personal challenges it would inevitably create. The role Charles was describing would allow her to make a significant impact on causes she cared deeply about, but it would also place her even more prominently in the center of family tensions. "What does William think about this idea?" she asked. "I haven't discussed it with him yet," Charles admitted. "I wanted to gauge your interest first, but I suspect he would be supportive, given how frustrated he's been with the attempts to marginalize your contributions." As they continued their discussion, Kate began to understand that Charles's proposal was about more than just her individual role. It represented his vision for how the monarchy could evolve to remain relevant and effective in the contemporary world. By elevating capable family members based on merit rather than strict hierarchical considerations, he was attempting to modernize the institution while maintaining its essential character. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charles's private secretary, who announced that Camilla had arrived and was requesting an audience. The timing felt significant, and Kate wondered whether Camilla had somehow learned about their meeting and chosen to interrupt it deliberately. "Perhaps I should go," Kate suggested, but Charles shook his head. "Actually, this might be an opportune time to begin addressing some of the tensions that have been building," he said. "Would you be comfortable staying while I speak with Camilla? Your presence might help clarify some important points." Before Kate could respond, Camilla entered the study. Her expression was carefully controlled, but Kate could see the subtle signs of strain around her eyes that suggested she was dealing with considerable stress. "Charles," Camilla said, her voice carrying a slight edge, "I hope I'm not interrupting something important." "Not at all," Charles replied smoothly. "Kate and I were just discussing some new charitable initiatives. In fact, your arrival is perfectly timed, as I was about to explain some changes that will affect how we structure our public engagements going forward." Camilla took a seat, her posture suggesting that she was prepared for a difficult conversation. "What kind of changes?" she asked. Charles outlined his proposal for Kate's expanded role, watching Camilla's face carefully as he explained the scope and significance of what he was suggesting. Kate remained silent, recognizing that this was a crucial moment in defining the family's power structure under Charles's reign. "That's quite an ambitious proposal," Camilla said when Charles finished speaking. "I'm sure Kate is honored by your confidence in her abilities." The words were diplomatically phrased, but Kate could hear the underlying reservation in Camilla's tone. "I am honored," Kate said, speaking for the first time since Camilla's arrival. "I'm also aware that such a role would require careful coordination with everyone's schedules and priorities." "Indeed," Camilla replied. "It would be important to ensure that such an initiative doesn't conflict with other planned activities or create confusion about our various responsibilities." The conversation continued for another hour, with each participant carefully navigating the complex dynamics that the proposal had revealed. Charles remained firm in his support for the idea, while Camilla raised practical concerns that seemed designed to highlight potential complications. Kate found herself in the delicate position of expressing enthusiasm for the opportunity while trying not to appear dismissive of Camilla's concerns. As the meeting concluded, Kate left Clarence's house with a clearer understanding of both the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. Charles's proposal represented a remarkable vote of confidence, but implementing it would require navigating family politics that had become increasingly complex since his coronation. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Kate time to reflect on the conversation and its implications. The role Charles had outlined would allow her to make a significant impact on causes she cared deeply about, but it would also place her in an even more prominent position within ongoing family tensions. The challenge would be finding ways to pursue the opportunity while maintaining the relationships that were essential for long-term success. That evening, Kate shared the details of her conversation with William over a quiet dinner in their private dining room. His reaction was immediately supportive, but she could see that he was also processing the potential complications that such a high-profile role might create. "It's an incredible opportunity," William said after Kate finished explaining Charles's proposal. "You'd be able to accomplish so much more than you could within the traditional constraints of royal protocol. But it would also make me an even bigger target for criticism from within the family," Kate pointed out. Camilla's reaction today made it clear that there would be significant resistance to the idea. William considered this for a moment before responding. "Sometimes the most important progress requires accepting some level of conflict. If Father is willing to support you despite potential objections, perhaps that's an indication that the benefits outweigh the costs." As they continued their discussion, Kate found herself thinking about the broader implications of Charles's proposal. The role would represent not just her individual advancement, but a statement about how the monarchy intended to evolve under his leadership. It would demonstrate a commitment to recognizing merit and effectiveness over traditional hierarchical considerations. Over the following days, Kate noticed subtle changes in how various family members interacted with her. There seemed to be an awareness that significant developments were in motion, even though the specific details of Charles's proposal hadn't been widely shared. Palace staff who had previously maintained polite but distant relationships began seeking opportunities to engage with her more directly. The shift was most noticeable during a family gathering at Windsor Castle the following weekend. Kate arrived to find that the usual careful orchestration of interactions had been replaced by something that felt more organic and respectful. Even family members who had previously seemed reserved in their communications appeared more willing to engage with her on substantive topics, and approached Kate during a break in the formal proceedings, her expression characteristically direct. "Charles mentioned that he's discussed some new initiatives with you," she said without preamble. "I want you to know that you have my complete support for whatever direction you decide to pursue." The statement was brief, but significant, representing another indication that Charles's vision for Kate's expanded role was gaining support among key family members. Anne's endorsement carried particular weight due to her reputation for practical judgment and her long experience with royal responsibilities. As the weekend progressed, Kate began to see evidence that Charles was systematically building support for his proposal among various family members and palace staff. The process was being handled with characteristic discretion, but the cumulative effect was to create an environment where the eventual announcement of her expanded role would seem natural and well-considered rather than sudden or controversial. The most significant moment came during a private conversation with Charles on Sunday evening, as the family gathering was concluding. He pulled Kate aside to provide an update on his efforts to build consensus around the new initiative. "I've had encouraging conversations with several key people over the past few days," Charles told her. "While there will inevitably be some resistance to change, I believe we have enough support to move forward with confidence." "What about Camilla's concerns?" Kate asked. Charles was quiet for a moment before responding. "Camilla is still adjusting to her new role and responsibilities. Change can be challenging for anyone, but I'm confident that she'll come to see the benefits of the approach we're proposing." As Kate prepared to leave Windsor Castle that evening, she reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed over the past month. Charles's public gesture of support at the charity gala had been just the beginning of a larger transformation that was still unfolding. The proposal for her expanded role represented an opportunity that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier, but it also carried responsibilities and challenges that would test her abilities in new ways. The path forward would require careful navigation of family dynamics, public expectations, and institutional traditions. But with Charles's support and a growing base of allies within the family, Kate felt increasingly confident that she could successfully take on whatever challenges lay ahead. The role he had proposed would allow her to make a meaningful impact on causes she cared deeply about, while helping to demonstrate the monarchy's continued relevance and effectiveness in the contemporary world. As her car wound through the countryside toward London, Kate found herself thinking about the historical significance of the moment. She was witnessing and participating in the evolution of an institution that had endured for centuries by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character. Charles's willingness to elevate her based on merit rather than strict protocol represented exactly the kind of thoughtful modernization that would ensure the monarchy's continued success in the years ahead. The morning of the Commonwealth Summit dawned gray and drizzly, with London's autumn weather providing a somber backdrop for what everyone knew would be a pivotal moment in the evolution of the modern monarchy. Inside Buckingham Palace, preparations had been underway since before sunrise as staff members made final arrangements for an event that would bring together heads of state, diplomatic officials, and charitable leaders from across the Commonwealth nations. Kate stood in her dressing room, carefully adjusting the emerald brooch that had been specially commissioned for today's announcement. The piece had been designed to incorporate symbols from various Commonwealth countries, representing the global scope of the initiative she was about to launch. As she studied her reflection in the mirror, she felt the weight of the moment settling around her like a mantle of responsibility. Today would mark the official announcement of her appointment as the Commonwealth Charitable Coordination Ambassador, a role that Charles had spent weeks carefully positioning and building support for among key stakeholders. The title itself had been crafted to convey both authority and accessibility, suggesting someone who could work effectively across cultural and political boundaries while maintaining the dignity that her royal position required. A soft knock interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called, turning to see William entering with an expression that mixed pride and concern in equal measure. "How are you feeling?" he asked, moving to stand behind her as she made final adjustments to her appearance. "Nervous," Kate admitted honestly. "This feels like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory." William placed his hands gently on her shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You've never been more ready for anything in your life," he said firmly. Father chose you for this role because he recognizes something that others have been slow to acknowledge. You have a unique ability to connect with people and inspire them to work toward common goals. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward the blue drawing room where the family was gathering, Kate reflected on the weeks of careful preparation that had led to this moment. Charles had orchestrated a series of private meetings with key Commonwealth leaders, building enthusiasm for the initiative while ensuring that the announcement would be met with broad international support. The process had not been without its challenges. There had been several tense family meetings where concerns about protocol and precedent had been raised and debated. Camilla, in particular, had continued to express reservations about the wisdom of creating such a high-profile role outside the traditional hierarchy. Her concerns had been diplomatically presented, but everyone understood the underlying tensions they represented. Despite these challenges, Charles had remained unwavering in his support for the initiative. His determination seemed to spring from a deep conviction that the monarchy needed to evolve in order to remain relevant, and that Kate represented exactly the kind of fresh perspective that could help achieve that evolution. The blue drawing room buzzed with quiet energy as family members made final preparations for the day's events. Charles appeared calm and confident, reviewing last-minute details with his private secretary while acknowledging each family member with warmth and attention. His demeanor suggested someone who was entirely comfortable with the decisions he had made and ready to stand behind them publicly, and approached Kate as she entered the room, her expression carrying its usual directness but softened by what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Today's the day," she said simply. "I hope you know how proud we all are of what you're about to undertake." The statement meant more to Kate than and probably realized. The Princess Royal's approval had always carried special weight due to her reputation for practical judgment and her decades of experience with charitable work. Having her explicit support would make it much more difficult for anyone to question the wisdom of Charles's decision. As the family prepared to move to the throne room where the announcement ceremony would take place, Kate noticed that even the palace staff seemed to sense the historical significance of the moment. There was an undercurrent of excitement among the usually reserved household members, as though everyone understood they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in the monarchy's evolution. The throne room had been arranged with meticulous attention to symbolic detail. Representatives from each Commonwealth nation were seated according to carefully planned protocols that emphasized equality and mutual respect. The media section had been positioned to capture not just the announcement itself, but also the reactions of the distinguished international audience. As the formal procession began, Kate found herself walking directly behind Charles and Camilla, a positioning that would not have been possible under traditional protocols, but which Charles had specifically requested. The symbolism was subtle but unmistakable. She was being presented as a senior member of the royal team, someone whose authority derived directly from the monarch's confidence rather than from inherited position. Charles's opening remarks established the context for the announcement with characteristic eloquence and strategic precision. He spoke about the Commonwealth's shared commitment to charitable work, the need for coordinated responses to global challenges, and the importance of empowering leaders who could work effectively across cultural and national boundaries. "Today," Charles said, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate room, "I have the privilege of announcing an initiative that will strengthen our Commonwealth bonds while advancing causes that touch the lives of millions of people around the world." Kate felt her heart rate increase as Charles's words built toward the moment she had been preparing for. Around the room, she could see representatives leaning forward in anticipation, their expressions suggesting that word of something significant had already begun to circulate through diplomatic channels. "The Commonwealth Charitable Coordination Ambassador will serve as a focal point for collaborative efforts across our member nations," Charles continued. "This role requires someone with exceptional diplomatic skills, deep understanding of charitable work, and the ability to inspire others to work toward common goals." The pause that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity, though Kate knew it lasted only a few seconds. In that moment of silence, she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes focused on the front of the room, waiting for the announcement that would reshape her role within the royal family and create new possibilities for charitable collaboration across the Commonwealth. "It is my great pleasure," Charles said, his voice carrying both formality and unmistakable pride, "to announce that Catherine, Princess of Wales, has accepted the position of Commonwealth Charitable Coordination Ambassador." The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic, with representatives from across the Commonwealth rising to their feet in a show of support that clearly demonstrated the international backing that Charles had carefully cultivated. Kate felt a surge of gratitude and determination as she realized how effectively her father-in-law had prepared the ground for this moment. As she rose to acknowledge the applause, Kate caught sight of Camilla's face. The queen consort was applauding along with everyone else, but her expression remained carefully neutral, suggesting that she was still processing the implications of what had just occurred. The announcement represented a significant shift in the family's power structure, one that would require ongoing adjustment and negotiation. Charles gestured for Kate to join him at the podium, and, as she walked forward, she was acutely aware that every step was being recorded for history. The moment represented not just her individual advancement, but a statement about how the monarchy intended to adapt to contemporary challenges while maintaining its essential character. "Your Majesty," Kate began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I am deeply honored by your confidence in me and humbled by the opportunity to serve the Commonwealth in this capacity." As she continued with her prepared remarks, Kate found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From the uncertain young woman who had first entered royal circles to the confident leader who was now accepting responsibility for Commonwealth-wide charitable coordination, the transformation had been gradual but profound. Her speech outlined her vision for the role, emphasizing collaboration, innovation, and the importance of addressing root causes rather than just symptoms of social challenges. The response from the audience was overwhelmingly positive, with several representatives nodding in approval as she described specific initiatives she hoped to develop. The formal ceremony concluded with the presentation of the specially commissioned brooch that would serve as the symbol of her new office. As Charles pinned the piece to her jacket, the gesture carried symbolic weight that went far beyond its ceremonial function. It represented his public endorsement of her authority and his confidence in her ability to represent the Commonwealth effectively on the global stage. The reception that followed provided an opportunity for Kate to engage directly with the international representatives who would be her partners in the new initiative. The conversations were energizing and inspiring, with leaders from various nations expressing enthusiasm for collaborative projects that could address challenges ranging from education access to environmental protection. During a brief break in the formal proceedings, Charles approached Kate with an expression of satisfaction and pride. "That went even better than I had hoped," he said quietly. "The international response has been remarkable." "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity," Kate replied. "I understand the risks you took in creating this role, and I'm committed to proving that your confidence was well placed." Charles studied her face for a moment before responding. "I have no doubts about your ability to succeed. What I want you to remember is that you've earned this position through your own merit and dedication. Don't let anyone suggest otherwise." As the day progressed, Kate noticed the subtle ways that the announcement was already beginning to change her interactions with various family members and palace staff. There was a new level of deference in how people approached her, a recognition that she now held a position of genuine authority within the royal structure. The most significant conversation came during a brief private moment with Camilla as the reception was winding down. The queen consort approached Kate with her characteristic poise, but there was something different in her demeanor, a recognition that the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. "Congratulations on your appointment," Camilla said, her tone carefully neutral. "It's quite a significant responsibility you've taken on." "Thank you," Kate replied, sensing the layers of meaning beneath Camilla's polite words. "I hope we can work together to ensure that all our charitable efforts complement each other effectively." The exchange was brief, but important, representing a tacit acknowledgement of the new reality that Charles's decision had created. While tensions would undoubtedly continue to exist beneath the surface, the public nature of Kate's appointment made it impossible for anyone to continue treating her as anything less than a senior member of the royal team. As the formal events concluded and Kate prepared to leave the palace, she found herself reflecting on the magnitude of what had just occurred. The appointment represented not just personal advancement, but a demonstration of how effectively Charles was using his authority as monarch to modernize the institution while maintaining its essential character. The challenges ahead would be substantial. Managing charitable coordination across the Commonwealth would require diplomatic skills, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to navigate complex political landscapes. But Kate felt confident that the foundation Charles had helped her build would provide the support necessary for success. The drive back to Kensington Palace provided time for Kate and William to process the significance of the day's events. The announcement had exceeded their most optimistic expectations, with international leaders expressing genuine enthusiasm for the collaborative approach that Kate would be implementing. "Father really went to extraordinary lengths to ensure today's success," William observed as they reviewed the media coverage that was already beginning to appear online. "The level of international support he managed to build was remarkable." Kate nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of what Charles had accomplished on her behalf. "It's clear that this has been in development for much longer than I realized. The coordination required to achieve today's level of enthusiasm from so many different nations must have taken months of careful preparation." As evening approached, and Kate had time to fully absorb what had transpired, she found herself thinking about the historical significance of the moment. The appointment represented a new model for how the monarchy could remain relevant and effective in addressing contemporary global challenges. By elevating capable family members based on merit rather than strict hierarchical considerations, Charles was demonstrating the kind of thoughtful evolution that would ensure the institution's continued success. The responsibilities ahead would be demanding, but Kate felt energized by the possibilities they represented. The role would allow her to work on causes she cared deeply about, while building bridges between nations that shared common values and goals. More importantly, it would provide an opportunity to demonstrate that the monarchy could be a force for positive change in addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. As she prepared for bed that night, Kate reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed since that first family gathering where subtle tensions had begun to surface. Charles's decision to publicly support her had led to opportunities she never could have imagined, culminating in today's appointment to a role that would allow her to make a meaningful impact on a global scale. The journey ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges and require careful navigation of complex diplomatic and family relationships. But with Charles's continued support and a growing network of international allies, Kate felt confident that she could successfully fulfill the responsibilities of her new position while helping to advance the monarchy's evolution into an institution that remained both traditional and thoroughly contemporary in its approach to service and leadership. 6 months after the Commonwealth announcement, the transformation in royal family dynamics had become undeniably evident to everyone within palace circles and far beyond. Kate's success in her new role had exceeded even Charles's optimistic projections, with her diplomatic initiatives yielding concrete results that strengthened relationships between Commonwealth nations while advancing charitable causes that had previously struggled to gain international attention. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kate's expanded office suite at Kensington Palace, illuminating maps, correspondence, and project proposals from across the Commonwealth that reflected the scope of her growing influence. Her schedule had evolved to include regular video conferences with heads of state, coordination meetings with international charitable organizations, and travel plans that would take her to remote communities where her initiatives were making measurable differences in people's lives. A soft knock on her office door announced the arrival of her expanded staff team, led by Sir Marcus Wellington, the distinguished diplomat whom Charles had personally recruited to serve as Kate's chief advisor. The appointment of such a senior figure to support her work had sent a clear message about the importance Charles placed on her success, and the resources he was willing to commit to ensuring it. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Sir Marcus said as he entered with 2 other staff members carrying briefing materials for the day's activities. "We have several significant developments to discuss before your call with the Prime Minister of New Zealand." As Kate reviewed the briefing materials, she reflected on how natural this expanded role had become for her. The initial nervousness about operating at such a high level of international diplomacy had gradually given way to confidence built on genuine expertise and a growing network of relationships with leaders who had come to respect her judgment and effectiveness. The success had not gone unnoticed within the royal family. While some tensions persisted, particularly with Camilla, who continued to struggle with the shift in family dynamics, most family members had come to recognize that Kate's elevated status was benefiting the institution as a whole. Her international profile had enhanced the monarchy's global reputation while demonstrating its continued relevance in addressing contemporary challenges. The most significant indicator of this acceptance had come the previous week, when Charles had announced his intention to formally expand Kate's title to include Commonwealth Ambassador, a designation that would make her the first non-sovereign royal to hold such broad international authority. The announcement had generated considerable media attention and positive commentary about the monarchy's willingness to evolve and adapt. As Kate concluded her morning briefings and prepared for the day's first international call, she noticed her personal assistant approaching with what appeared to be an urgent message. "Your Royal Highness," the assistant said quietly, "His Majesty has requested an immediate private meeting. He's waiting in the blue drawing room." The unexpected summons carried an undercurrent of urgency that made Kate slightly apprehensive. Charles rarely requested immediate meetings without advance notice, and the formal location he had chosen suggested that whatever he wanted to discuss was significant enough to require complete privacy and the gravitas that such a setting provided. Kate made her way through the palace corridors with a sense of anticipation mixed with concern. The past months had been remarkably smooth in terms of family relationships, with even the most skeptical members gradually acknowledging the success of her expanded role. She wondered whether some new challenge had emerged that would require careful navigation. Charles was standing near the window when Kate entered the blue drawing room, his posture suggesting deep contemplation rather than any immediate crisis. He turned as she approached, his expression serious but not troubled, indicating that whatever he wanted to discuss was important rather than problematic. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Charles said, gesturing for Kate to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. "I wanted to speak with you about something that requires absolute discretion, at least until we've had a chance to discuss all the implications." Kate settled into her chair, studying Charles's face for clues about what might be coming. "Of course," she said simply. Charles remained standing for a moment longer before moving to take the chair across from her. "I've been having conversations with several Commonwealth leaders about the possibility of expanding your role even further," he began. "The success you've achieved in coordinating charitable efforts has demonstrated something that many of us suspected but hadn't been able to prove definitively." "What's that?" Kate asked. "That you have the diplomatic skills and international credibility to serve effectively in a much broader capacity," Charles replied. "Several prime ministers have privately suggested that you could play a valuable role in facilitating discussions between Commonwealth nations on issues that go beyond charitable coordination." The magnitude of what Charles was suggesting took Kate's breath away. Such an expansion would place her in the realm of actual diplomatic negotiations, a level of authority that had never been granted to a royal family member who wasn't the sovereign. It would represent a revolutionary change in how the monarchy engaged with international affairs. "That would be an extraordinary expansion of responsibility," Kate said carefully. "Are you certain that such a role would be appropriate within our constitutional framework?" Charles leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating that he had given considerable thought to exactly that question. "I've been consulting with constitutional experts and diplomatic advisors for several weeks. The consensus is that such a role could be structured in a way that complements rather than conflicts with official government diplomatic channels." As Charles outlined his vision for Kate's expanded responsibilities, she began to understand that he was proposing something unprecedented in the modern history of the monarchy. The role would involve facilitating conversations between Commonwealth nations on issues ranging from trade relationships to environmental cooperation, serving as a trusted intermediary who could help bridge differences and build consensus. "The key advantage you would bring," Charles explained, "is that you're not seen as representing any particular national interest. The Commonwealth leaders I've spoken with view you as genuinely committed to finding solutions that benefit everyone involved, rather than advancing any specific political agenda." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charles's private secretary, who announced that William had arrived and was requesting to join the meeting. Charles looked to Kate with raised eyebrows, silently asking whether she was comfortable having William involved in the discussion at this stage. "I think it would be helpful to have William's perspective," Kate said, recognizing that such a significant expansion of her role would inevitably affect him as well. William entered with his characteristic combination of confidence and concern, clearly aware that something significant was being discussed but uncertain about the specifics. Charles quickly brought him up to speed on the proposal, watching his son's face carefully as he explained the scope and implications of what was being considered. "That's remarkable," William said when Charles finished outlining the proposal. "It would place Kate in a position of international influence that no royal family member has ever held." "Exactly," Charles replied, "which is why we need to consider all the implications very carefully before making any decisions." As the three of them continued their discussion, Kate found herself thinking about the historical significance of what was being proposed. The role would represent not just her individual advancement, but a fundamental evolution in how the monarchy could contribute to international cooperation and problem-solving. The conversation revealed that Charles had been laying groundwork for this expansion for several months, building support among Commonwealth leaders while carefully considering the constitutional and practical implications. His systematic approach reflected the same strategic thinking that had made Kate's initial appointment so successful. "What about potential objections within the family?" William asked, clearly thinking about the tensions that had emerged around Kate's previous elevation. Charles was quiet for a moment before responding. "There will undoubtedly be concerns about precedent and protocol. But the international support for this expansion is so strong that it would be difficult for anyone to argue against it on practical grounds." The meeting concluded with an agreement that Kate would take time to consider the proposal while Charles continued his consultations with key stakeholders. The decision would ultimately be hers, but everyone understood that accepting such a role would represent a commitment to responsibilities that would shape the rest of her public life. Over the following days, Kate found herself weighing the extraordinary opportunities against the inevitable challenges that such an expanded role would bring. The position would allow her to make a meaningful impact on issues that affected millions of people across the Commonwealth, but it would also place her at the center of complex political dynamics that would require extraordinary skill to navigate successfully. The most significant conversation came during a private dinner with William, where they discussed not just the professional implications of the proposal, but its potential effects on their family life and their children's future experiences. The role would require extensive travel and high-level diplomatic engagement that would be demanding in ways they had never experienced. "I think you should accept," William said after they had thoroughly discussed all aspects of the proposal. "You have a unique opportunity to demonstrate that the monarchy can be a force for positive change in addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. Are you certain you're comfortable with the level of public attention and scrutiny that would come with such a role?" Kate asked. William considered the question carefully before responding. "I think the benefits outweigh the costs. You've already proven that you can handle intense scrutiny while maintaining your authenticity and effectiveness. This expansion would just allow you to do so on a larger scale." A week later, Kate requested a private meeting with Charles to inform him of her decision. She arrived at Clarence's house to find him waiting in his study, surrounded by correspondence and briefing materials that suggested he had been working on matters related to her potential appointment. "I've decided to accept the expanded role," Kate said without preamble as she took her seat across from Charles. "The opportunity to contribute to Commonwealth cooperation and problem-solving is too important to pass up." Charles's face broke into a smile that revealed how much her acceptance meant to him. "I'm delighted," he said simply. "I believe this decision will be remembered as a turning point in how the monarchy engages with international affairs." As they discussed the practical details of implementing the expanded role, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the subtle tensions at that first family gathering to her acceptance of unprecedented international responsibilities, the transformation had been remarkable in both its scope and its speed. The formal announcement of Kate's expanded role took place 3 weeks later at a special Commonwealth summit that Charles had convened specifically for that purpose. The international response was overwhelmingly positive, with leaders from across the Commonwealth expressing enthusiasm for the collaborative approach that Kate would be implementing. As Kate stood beside Charles during the announcement ceremony, she was struck by the symbolism of the moment. The gesture represented not just her individual advancement, but a demonstration of how effectively the monarchy could evolve while maintaining its essential character and values. The months that followed confirmed the wisdom of Charles's decision. Kate's diplomatic initiatives yielded concrete results in facilitating cooperation between Commonwealth nations, while her charitable coordination efforts continued to expand and achieve measurable impact on the lives of people across the globe. The success had a transformative effect on family dynamics as well. Even Camilla, who had initially been resistant to Kate's elevation, came to acknowledge the benefits that her expanded role brought to the institution as a whole. The monarchy's international reputation had been significantly enhanced, while its domestic approval ratings reached levels not seen in decades. Looking back on the dramatic changes that had occurred since that first public gesture of support, Kate recognized that Charles had demonstrated extraordinary vision and courage in reshaping how the royal family functioned. His willingness to elevate capable family members based on merit rather than strict protocol had created new possibilities for how the monarchy could remain relevant and effective in addressing contemporary challenges. The journey ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges and require continued evolution in how the family approached its responsibilities. But the foundation that Charles had established provided a framework for success that honored both tradition and the need for meaningful adaptation to changing circumstances. As Kate prepared for her next international diplomatic mission, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunities that Charles's vision and support had created. The path from that moment of tension at the family gathering to her current position as a globally recognized diplomatic leader had been remarkable, but she understood that it was just the beginning of what could be accomplished when the monarchy embraced its potential for positive change while maintaining its essential character and values. The transformation had demonstrated that reaching for someone, choosing to support and elevate them based on their merit and potential, could create ripple effects that benefited not just individuals, but entire institutions and the communities they served. Charles's decision to reach for Kate rather than maintaining the status quo had proven that bold leadership could successfully navigate the delicate balance between tradition and innovation, creating new possibilities for service and impact that would shape the monarchy for generations to come.